thanks for being here, man.
Yeah, my great pleasure. I can't believe we pulled it off. We've been talking about it for a while.
I think there was only a few hurricanes in the way or some inclement weather.
Isn't that hilarious? I changed it because of the hurricane that I thought was coming straight to Austin.
Right.
But then as my brother-in-law who lives down in Houston posted, there was a sign that said hurricane for Austin. Then it said saw Buc-ee's and hung a right.
Yes.
So that was hilarious. And then today it's moving up through Louisiana and I got to fly back to Atlanta. So we'll be going over the storm. So it should be interesting times.
Well, listen, thanks for not letting a little sissy storm hold you up this time.
Airborne.
We're mission critical, man.
That's right.
We're what did they call us? We're essential. So we have to keep these conversations going.
Yeah.
So we'll start off by introducing yourself to anybody that's listening.
Sure. My name is Dave McCall. I work for a company called QTS Data Centers. I've been at QTS. I'm one of the original employees, so going on 20 years. But I've been around data centers or IT for almost 30 years, which makes me really old. So back in the mid-late 90s, I ended up at University of Texas medical branch down in Galveston, and I was there for right at 8 years, having the time of my life, and then ended up most of us in that original. Everybody not named Bill Clayman ended up in it accidentally, and I ended up in it accidentally through online racing. So it was a great journey. Online racing, yeah. So I thought my big claim to fame, I got into IT. So when I was a kid, to escape authority, maybe we talk about it later, just was not getting along with my folks. My dad comes from old school. My grandparents were all World War II vets. My uncles were all served in some capacity or the other.
Those generations were much
My
more
dad was a vet in the Air Force, and I just was struggling with authority and direction and purpose and whatever. They hadn't invented ADD yet.
They didn't have a name for it.
They didn't, And so
they just told your parents that you didn't have good discipline or you had a bad attitude.
They didn't have to tell them, man. Right. I got fired from a bunch of jobs, a bunch of other stuff. But anyway, so my dad was that generation that was like, look, you can't bum around here. These are your options. And a friend of mine, I was working as a chairlift operator at the local ski resort in Southern California, and a buddy of mine was going to the recruiter to get some National Guard information. So I rode with him, and they were playing this Airborne Ranger something video, and I was like,
I could do that.
That's totally me. It was not totally me, but so yeah, I joined Airborne, went from California to Georgia. Interesting experience, but for a while, it took me 10 years after I got out of that to kind of find where my aptitude and my attitude matched, and it was in IT. I never thought it would be. I didn't think that was my thing. And on the side, I discovered gaming. Back then, there was no broadband.
That's what you're talking about.
And so I started racing online, dial-up online. But I started hosting NASCAR or racing tournaments.
But on what? Like computer, PC? This is on console stuff.
Yeah. So there was a game back in the day by a company called Papyrus and called NASCAR Racing or something like that.
Now, were you doing this before you met your wife?
No, I met my wife in the late 80s, before I got
She probably wouldn't have married you if she knew you were this type of nerd back in the day.
No, not at all. If I was both that I was a nerd and my current shape, she was not attracted to the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man back then.
Oh, stop. But you were once tough Army Ranger.
Well, I wasn't a Ranger. I was airborne. So I went airborne, got assigned to a Pathfinder unit, did that for a while at Benning until I had Velcro on my stripes. I was always in trouble. My sergeants would say, man, you do push-ups till we get tired. And I just didn't, hopefully before we're done, we get a chance to talk about leadership and personal growth or whatever. But back then, I really struggled. And for the longest time, struggled in all the reasons that took me to the military about authority and submitting to good leadership and whatever, or even bad leadership. Submitting to authority was a struggle for me. And you can leverage that, but you also have to learn from it. I didn't know that well.
So your dad's advice was these are your options, and you were struggling with authority, and he was a military person himself, right? And you said, you know what, I'm just going to take that head on then. I'm going to go right into it because I hate it.
I just thought jumping out of airplanes would be the baddest thing you could do.
Isn't it crazy how how many people that we talk to who will tell you like, yeah, I can remember what movie I was watching when I realized I'm going to do this. But Top Gun's a recruiting movie for the Navy.
Yeah.
Crimson Tide, Hunt for October
Yeah.
for the submarine community for sure.
Yeah.
And it was a song, it sounds like, that got your attention. Just a music video maybe or something.
Well, no, I just showed it up, and they had this like recruiting video, like the few, the proud, the Marines, but it was this version of it. And I just bought into the idea. And,
what year was this roughly?
End of 83.
Okay.
Yeah, early 84.
Rebuilding the Army.
I was, off I went. I didn't get all my buddies got sign-on bonuses. I didn't even know that was a thing. I was just like, get me the hell out of my house and go do it. But anyway, so I ended up through a series of circumstances, not only in IT, but doing this hobby of racing, of gaming, but really racing. And I began learning this software that was commercially available. There was a little patch that would allow you, if you ran it on a local area network, a LAN, you could race 40 people at the same time. So you bought your computer, you bought a wheel, an actual wheel, and you would load your car up that you had painted with your sponsorship. It was a physics model. Seems kind of crazy today. This is not an arcade game, not an little joystick thing. This was like every tire had its own physics model. This is a legit thing. I'll tell you where it ended up going. But anyway, so I started doing that, and I discovered I started racing it. I was teaching at a little computer company. And at night, I asked the owner for permission to do this online racing thing. He said, sure. So we turned the classroom, set up like 8 computers. It was so addictive, Kirk. Like we started the Columbus Racing League. Every week we would post in the Sunday paper the results of hundreds of people came out to race. So very long story short, I started doing these tournaments online on the side. I ended up at the University of Texas, continued doing this stuff. And I started doing them around the country where people would come from all over the country. This is pre-911. They would bring their computers, bring their stuff. And I got to do one in Charlotte. I think it was like 2000. And this teenager showed up. His dad was into racing. He was in the junior league of racing. And he said, hey, can I come and race? He was a celebrity, more or less a celebrity. I didn't really follow racing that closely. I didn't know how big of a celebrity he was. So he showed up, and NBC News showed up. And this was like, his name was Dale Earnhardt Jr.
Stop.
So he shows up and races some of the races, and the world lost its mind. And Dale talks a lot. He formed a group called the Dirty Mo Posse. He raced online for years. We used to host the servers that he would race on, many of them in his early days. He brought a couple teenagers with him. One's name is Martin Truex, multi-time. He was a teenage kid at the time. Denny Hamlin Jr. Truex is at least 2-time NASCAR champion. This is his final year. So I met these kids when they were, and I broadcast the races. So we would host the server. It wasn't my league.
Was this your idea to patch together this whole thing?
I didn't put together his league, but I began broadcasting. I thought, how cool would this be? So first it was local area networks, then DSL and broadband came out. We're like, hey, let's do it online. So I would host a server at UT Galveston. I hope they're not looking for me. They were always like, what's all this internet traffic on Tuesday nights or Sunday nights? But through that online racing, I met people in the data center community. And there was a data center out in Atlanta that was owned by a telecom company. And my wife is from Georgia, and I wanted to get back to the state of Georgia. And I just got talking to this guy one day and said, hey, do you have any, how would I go about doing this? Not a job at his company. And he's like, you want to come to Georgia? I got a job in the data center business. And he had known me for years because we had worked together, and he'd helped me host stuff. Had like so many other people, unusual path to the data center industry. So I was familiar with IT. And back then, what became QTS, we were a co-location company. So the emphasis was on
this is pre-QTS.
This is pre-QTS. The emphasis was on the IT stack. It was on managed hosting. It was all the things that you would do. Retail co-location, DR. Eventually, we built our own private clouds, virtualization, managed hosting. All of that was the first 5 or 6 years. While we look like a real estate company today, we did not start off as a real estate company. We started off as a service-oriented retail co-location. One site, the QTS guys came along, and Chad Williams, our CEO, he had an idea to be in the space. He was learning it. He met some guys at some conventions that knew how to operate data centers. And they came along and bought this facility, and we became QTS in '05. And here we are today. But I got into the data center business through my relationships through online racing. Kind of a crazy world.
Anyone in particular that helped connect that bridge that's still in the game right now? Like the first people that introduced you? I mean, you've been at QTS for more than 20 years. How old is QTS, by the way?
Well, QTS became officially QTS in September of '05. So we just hit 19 years. So I was there a year before we became QTS. So the way that we measure internally is if we acquired an organization or whatever through merger and acquisition, you get to keep your tenure. So my 20th year is this year right now. But 19 years we've officially been QTS. There are a whole bunch of people still, it's crazy to think about, that were there at that original organization, which was called eDeltacom when I first got started. But the guy who invited me to join makes docks on Lake Martin, Alabama. Really smart guy. In fact, super genius guy. He had a full ride to MIT. But he really wanted to, he's a big Auburn fan and wanted to, so he went to Auburn as a ROTC cadet, basically paid his way, became an F-16 pilot, got out, formed a company called ViperNet in Auburn, the first like internet company there in Auburn, Alabama. And he was the executive vice president at QTS. So just another really cool connection to the military and service and veterans. And that attitude of service and military is just interwoven throughout our whole organization. But anyway, that's how I got connected to the org.
So that's a lot to unpackage, by the way. That's a lot of awesome stuff. Was Matt Tyndall one of those original OGs as well?
He was not one of the original ones. He came a few years later. Tyndall, good friend of mine, still talk to him on occasion. He's got a data center in Auburn as well, all these Auburn connections. No, he came, I want to say he came in '08 or '09, something like that. I don't remember. Was with us for a long time.
Gotcha. So, but going back, the original name prior to it being, because QTS was the acronym that it consolidated down into, it was, what did the Q and the T and the S refer to before? It was a real estate company, right?
Right. So we were, the data center side of us was called eDeltacom. We were a wholly owned subsidiary of ITC Deltacom, which was a telecom company in the Southeast. Quality Group of Companies was the company owned by Chad Williams out of Overland Park, Kansas, where he still is today. And Chad's got an incredible story. Among other things, his family owned a auto salvage, used car, but like high-end car stuff. And it had been in his family for generations. Chad's dad got sick when he was young, high school, and he didn't drop out of high school, but his whole time away from school was managing the family business. And over time, he became interested in real estate. Like he's just a business guy. He's very entrepreneurial minded, like all of these great geniuses are. And he felt like, look, there's an opportunity, a real opportunity in real estate beyond my love of cars and this legacy that I have. And so as he began pursuing real estate, he saw an opportunity for technology in real estate and began learning of this idea called data centers. This is probably 2002-ish, something like that. And he had formed a company called Quality Group of Companies, bought a building with what we called a data center back then in it. Chad still calls it a data center. You and I probably wouldn't be as affectionate towards it, but it was a data center for all intents and purposes. And at some of these events, he met some other folks who had the expertise in operating a data center. And they got all together. Chad was the investor and the vision. These guys were the operations folks. And they went out looking for an opportunity, and they found one in Atlanta, and they bought what eventually became that data center that I was at. And it became Quality Technology Services. So that's the connection between the two. And eventually that became QTS Data Centers when we went public in 2013.
Okay. And for some reason, I thought I had the word real estate inside of it too. QTS.
Well, we were a variety of versions of that. Quality Investment Trust. Yeah. But Quality Technology Services was the original, and eventually it landed on QTS Data Centers.
And the only market you guys started in was in Georgia?
Yeah, that was real. I mean, we started with this very modest in Overland Park, but really, and the one in Georgia, the folks that built that at the time they built it was at the big .com, all kinds of money. They spared no expense and
tier 4
tools, like everything. Well, it was concurrently maintainable. So it's tier 3. Uptime would still argue you're not allowed to use a tier unless you're actually certified. Fair enough. So we would say concurrently maintainable, but which was more than enough for colocation, plenty.
Sure.
But it was, when I got there, it wasn't empty, but it looked like a set for the Matrix much more than it did a fully operational Death Star full of servers and blinking lights. So that was a blast, but it's, about a 30 megawatt capable facility at the time.
Which is a lot back in those days.
Yeah.
30 megs was a big deal back in those days.
We started with high-tech kinetic flywheels and we moved to
I remember
active
those.
power and Liebert and all of that other stuff. And, it's just such a, you look back on it now, you're like, why didn't you do this? At the time, we were all figuring it out as we did it.
The whole industry, Carrie Getz said it on a podcast with me one time. She said, yeah, I'm a part of the generation. The baby boomer generation all started in this industry together. There was no one to call. Like now people can call you. You've been in this game forever, but you didn't have a you to call when you started, right?
That's right.
So a lot of the first waivers, a lot of the people that have been in the industry for 20 to 30 years, they were going through this first apprenticeship of an emerging vertical that was incredibly niche for the first time.
That's right.
And the lexicon wasn't even locked down yet. In some respects, some could argue that it's still not. There's a different interpretation for a few different words that are still being exchanged in this space.
Yeah.
So tell us, listen, this is a great podcast. Can I scratch the paint on this as you tell your story?
Yeah.
I don't want to hold up. I mean, listen, are you sure? All right.
Let's go wherever.
Well, look, I really hope that this is 20 something years ago. You through a hobby, through something that you liked technology is a hobby for a lot of people. And technology is an application that enables a lifestyle that they really enjoy. And you were able to take that product and use it as a bridge. In spite of yourself, there was no data center industry. Even now, I mean, think of how many kids at whatever age you were then, you were probably late 30s, early 40s, maybe?
Like 30s.
So you're sitting here watching this and people like data centers and you're like, sure, data centers sounds like a cool industry. Never heard of it. Right. But what was that like muscling through that, knowing that there's no guarantees this industry would emerge? Right. So this industry is incredibly stable to the point in which I will argue that within this time next year, this will be one of the most mainstream industries on earth after an election cycle. When the focus goes back to AI and that leads everybody to start asking what the limitations of power will be, everyone's going to start asking what are these data centers all about then, right? Because they're what serves cloud, it's what serves AI.
Right.
And now everyone's going to have to look below the waterline for the first time and understand what technology really is. Yeah. Since smartphones came out, no one cared at all where that information came from because there was no limitations. We left data. We left the minutes of cellular, hey, you have so many minutes, and if you roll over, we charge you, and we just moved to data, right? And when that happened, people were like, oh, it's unlimited. I can do anything I want with this. Yeah. We know that's not true anymore, right? But when you were starting, it wasn't even an industry. Now it's a monster, right? So talk us through that.
Sure.
And what you saw, 30 megawatts, dude, it took companies 5 to 10 years to get to that volume and velocity of capacity, right? And now it's some of those same companies QTS probably doesn't pick their teeth for 30 megawatts at a click now, right?
I think I have it in my ashtray out.
Does that make sense?
But let's just back up for just a second. So coming out of the IT world, I don't know why this is. It's happened so many times in my life, this cycle of somebody would invite me to participate in something. And at first I would say yes. One, they liked me. Whatever it is that they saw in me connected with them. 3, the money seemed like a great opportunity from where I was. I was a kid who went and got a GED and joined the Army. And it wasn't for intellectual ability, I don't think. It was just lack of focus, wandering, whatever.
I always say this, grades in high school don't reflect intelligence, they reflect interest. Yeah. Right? And some people are in high school and they just don't care about that because they're not interested in that. It's too on the other side.
One of my really good buddies was a trainer at Navy Nuke School, super genius guy, still in the business. and he flunked out of his community college.
Sure.
Because he just got caught up in
interest.
stuff that, tripped him up. And for me, I had a bunch of other stuff that tripped me up. And later in my 40s, I went back to school to get it and got a degree because I didn't want that to be my story for myself or for my kids. And then I was angry at myself at how not easy school was, but, it was really pretty easy. All things considered. But anyway, and then I'd accept an opportunity. I'd get into the opportunity and I'd have a heart attack. What am I doing here? I know nothing about IT. I got an opportunity to go to the University of Texas because my mom was a headhunter in Houston. Had got myself in big trouble in my previous job where I was teaching. Even before that, some of the, I was in sales. I was not doing well. And these folks had come back from a computer class and they had all these books on Word and Excel and whatever. And they were paying these people a fortune to teach them how to use these things. And I'd pick up the book and I'd learn it in 20 minutes. Not because I was smart. It's just how my brain's wired. You just saw, my brain just ordered things a certain way. I pick up a book on firewalls or whatever. I got it. I don't know why. But anyway, I went to that organization and said, hey, I wanted more money than just my day job. Do you guys hire nighttime instructors? They said, are you an expert in these areas? Of course I am. If you give me the course books, I'll get familiar with your style. And they said, okay. And I would just, Kirk, I'd just take them home and read them the night before.
And teach them what you learned the night
before. And I wish I could say it because it just lined up with me, just like some people who do biology or whatever it is. It just lined up with me. And so I would go into these classrooms the next day and I learned also just sort of intuitively from moving all over the country with my dad through IBM, on how to get along with people or find a way so you don't get your ass kicked, or you wanted to go out on a date. You had to find a way to adapt and overcome. And so I would introduce humor and, but get to the point of the material and all these other things, which was completely different than anybody they had experienced. No disrespect to them. Usually it's introverted engineers or whatever that are leading that discussion. And to other introverted engineers, you're seeing their language, but that's a narrow slice of people usually. And so I found this funny, but I remember that second day in, I was like, what am I doing here? I can't do this. I ended up having tremendous success there until my mouth got me in trouble. And then I got invited. My mom called me up one day. She's a headhunter out of Houston, said, hey, look, UT is hiring contractors to come in and install motherboards and infrastructure and systems. Can you come do that for them? Well, that was my jam. I was like, sure. She's like, just call it a vacation. So I went and worked at UT for a couple of weeks doing this. And they loved me. And they were like, can you do Novell network administration? Of course I can. That's what I do. Not entirely true.
Go get the book.
I knew basic Novell because I had to network these computer systems together to do my racing, but that was it. And they said, well, we want to hire you for our department. Ironically, the Department of Psychiatry, which seems to be apropos somehow. So they interviewed me. And through that interview process, the interview was really with one senior person. And when I got to his office for the interview, he was super frustrated because he was trying to load his database and it just wasn't connecting. He was like, I can't believe this. And I said, well, before we start the interview, do you mind if I help you? Get a look. I knew nothing about databases. I didn't know how this is going to go. But I looked at it and I noticed that the connection light was blinking. Remember, this is Windows 95 era. I've solved these problems for racers all over the country for the last 3 or 4 years in my spare time. So I look around and I notice the NIC card's not giving me the send receive. And I looked and it looks like the cable's plugged into the wall, but the little tab had gotten broken and it had come out. I plug it in, everything resets. To him, it's magic. You're hired. And a few weeks later, I'm working at UT. So I get there and they're going to pay me the ungodly sum of like $35,000, $40,000 a year. And we're living on this island and we're like, yay. And then my first week there, I'm like, what the F have I done? A month ago, I was teaching Microsoft Word, which I was just figuring out how to do Access Data, but whatever. Like this is my story over and over and over. So when I landed in, and I thrived in that environment. Once I got, you talk about imposter syndrome in here and we'll probably get to that later. But man, anxiety ate me up. Fear would catch me up. Jumping out of Huey's jumping out of C-130s and C-140s, I don't like heights. You won't get me to walk on the edge of the building. But if I trust my teammates, if I trust the gear, maybe naively, I've been trained, I'm out the door. Like I don't want to get shot. I'm more worried about those Air Force pilots who don't even know they're men coming out to the back. Just shove them out, it's more or less near the green smoke. No disrespect to the Air Force guys, but it was, that wasn't fearful. I didn't stay up at night scared about that. It was, they're going to call on me and I'm not going to be able to deliver or perform. So I ended up I got an opportunity to come and they're like, what do you know about data, or would you like this opportunity? And I said, I don't know anything about data centers. They said, but it's managing the senior product engineering group, which is all engineers. It's all IT people, the backups, the patching, building exchange, all of this kind of stuff. You know that. You've done that one way or the other at UT for 8 years, and you're a great communicator and collaborator. And it's this much money. I'm all in, and my wife's going to get back to Georgia. It'll be great. I get there. I remember the second day I was there, I was in this meeting, and these guys remember, we had almost no customers. So it was right after the .com. Your original question was, how did you know this industry was going to be an industry? Well, I didn't know the data center industry. I just knew the IT industry. And I really didn't even know this particular company,
center, right?
They really didn't. It was co-location. I didn't even think about co-location. I just knew how we did IT infrastructure and stack at UT in my department and in the larger overall scheme of things. So I get to the organization and all of a sudden I'm starting to panic because they're walking through these tool sets of how they're walking MIBs, and all of your network people will know what that means. And they're going through tool after tool on how they're connecting to their storage infrastructure, how they're balancing workloads between network and compute and storage, how they have to solve all of these problems. And they're looking at me about knowing, how does SAN and NAS work? How does compute? I knew a little sliver of that stuff. We're moving towards virtualization. VMware was going to be on the horizon. We didn't know it yet. All of these other things. But all of this stuff had been bought and built about an hour before this company went and became a penny stock. So they had, at their heyday, were a 500 employee group with no customers, just like everybody else in the .com world.
Sure.
So they had spent hundreds of millions of dollars on this facility, which was not yet 30 megawatts. That's what the potential of it was. It's maybe 5 or 10. But we had this giant 300,000 square foot raised floor that was almost entirely empty. We had all of this infrastructure, all this capability with almost no customers. So I showed up, I had no idea. I didn't even know I was to be worried. And then I learned it was a penny stock, all this other stuff. I didn't know we were going to be on the shopping, out getting shopped or any of those other things. And maybe we can get into that later, because I had a serious mental health episode about a year after this when all of that sort of crashed down on me. But at the time, the fear was, the technology. I knew how to be a leader, but could I be a leader of these people? I knew what I had sucked at and failed at, what I didn't want to be, how I wanted to reinvent myself as a human being. So I had no idea what the quote unquote data center industry was or wasn't going to be. I just knew I had an opportunity in front of me. And I tried to take advantage of the opportunity the best I could. And, thank God that I got blessed. We got blessed as a company. But here's the other thing to that. We're just doers. I think the people that not just survive, but thrive in this world are not the ones that don't have fear.
The ones most creative.
Sometimes it's even the most creative. You mentioned Matt Tyndall before. Matt Tyndall cracks me up because he'll say he's not creative or whatever. Yes, he is. So many of my people, my CEO, I can't even tell you how many times, or so much of our leadership, and this is not a pimping out that's probably the wrong way to say it, but a glorification of our organization. But man, we just don't know any better. We're just doers. Like, what's the problem? If these things to solve were easy, somebody else would do them. The reason why they've come to us is because they're hard. They're really hard to solve, either the speed or the scale or whatever. And we don't know any better. We just dive in and do it. And so I wasn't particularly creative, but stubborn and worked through. And I got connected to a number of other people, regardless of how they express themselves or their background. It's the same thing. And we just kept doing and just kept doing. And opportunities, we kept getting quote unquote lucky. And, we just kept working through those things. So that, anyway, I didn't really know what the data center industry was. We didn't really think of ourselves as the data center industry. We were not a real estate organization. That's not how we thought of ourselves. We still don't, even though we
thought of yourselves as an IT company.
We thought of ourselves as servants, like genuinely. I know that's a catchphrase today. Go check the tape and see when we started saying it. But you can't survive in the IT service business if you don't have a servant's heart out there all night doing maintenance windows, with that headset on, walking customers through their IT stack. Were
you guys doing a lot of smart hands and
all of it?
Okay, so
all of it. Was
QTS kind of a retail colo before they
100%.
Okay,
yeah, we built all of their. We would do everything from you would host your stuff into our world. And we would manage almost nothing of it. Like you just managed it all. We were just space and power for you, not unlike today. Or it could be as much as we did everything but your actual data. We would
manage services,
rack, stack, patch, all your firewall, all your backup infrastructure. We designed the entire environment.
What was the minimum size that you guys would contract at?
In the early days,
like a rack. Okay, so that's what I'm saying. So back then, we
would lease you the server back in the day.
But that's what I'm saying. It would be all in, right? You guys would go all in.
100%. And so you had to, like, when somebody calls up and they got one computer, this is long before cloud. There was no cloud. There was no water vapor yet, fog, mist, whatever. It was just us. And this plumbing company, they knew how to work hard, but they didn't know how to maintain a website. They didn't know how to do any of that stuff. Whoever. Like, we were everything for them. And so we just learned in that crucible fire. We also learned how to communicate. The compute, which is the server itself, that team of people has a different skill set than the network people that connects everything together, which is a completely different thing than the storage people. So as systems got bigger and larger and more complicated, you didn't have storage on the computer. You had it connected within the network infrastructure. And we had to learn how to balance those three legs of the stool. If you don't, you could have a massive computer that it'd be like, having the fastest car in the world, but you got one lane to get from here to the Austin airport. Like, there's no way it can handle the traffic. Or you could have 20 lanes, but the computer couldn't move more than 10 miles an hour. That's not going to. So we had to learn how to do that. We had to learn how to communicate within the teams, build protocols that work, do all of this other stuff. So it wasn't just build the infrastructure. It was, how do we communicate internally? And then how do we serve our customers? How do we communicate with them? How do we build trust with them? And so out of that foundation of, 12, 15 years, all the way up to 2018, that was one of our core competencies. At the same time, we began building what later became hyperscale and whatever, because those opportunities presented themselves to us. So it's these parallel tracks. Today, we're focused on enterprise and hyperscale. We just, as time goes on, we try not to be married to any technology. We're married to culture, operational maturity, and excellence, but not technology. So that's kind of been our journey.
In those early days, though, as we're defining what the industry is, and everyone, like I said, 20 plus years ago, was going through an internship. I got the Navy in 2000, and I started.
Thank you for your service.
Likewise, Mr. Army guy. My thing is, I started with, just on the power side, mainly hospitals. I mean, mission critical back then was like, it wasn't measured in downtime on, like in the military, we measured our mission critical experience in our own mortality, right? You could jump out of things and hurt yourself. I could pull the plug on something and never come back up, right? It's risks in what we did. Mission critical was quantified by the broker community in the early 2000s as wholesale was above a half a meg. Right. Retail was anything below it, below half meg. Was that about right?
Yeah.
And for me,
at least 5. Yeah. Maybe even smaller. But yeah.
And that's why I'm saying, like, how small were you guys contracting at? Because the service model for a wholesaler could be one building with 3 clients in it versus a retail person that has one building with 300 clients in it, and a lot of touching those people, right? So the services that go into that is a completely different model.
Yeah.
And when people were building, they were just like, what does the industry need? And at the time, when we were doing these things in the very beginning, I was starting with hospitals and FAA towers, and then got into mission critical environments because people were learning what redundancy was and what the reliability requirements would be for infrastructure. And there was no homogeneous construct yet to define what the standard would be for this industry. So everyone every project and every deal was different. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Everything was a brand new snowflake in the early days. Every operator was chasing the same thing, volume and velocity at whatever size they could get it to. And there wasn't really a standard yet, right? I think back then everything was on-prem, right? We were just now getting to the early parts where people were like, Vern, I'm gonna give you some of my DR, right? They weren't putting production in the outsourced environments as yet. They were testing the industry, which galvanized the industry and turned it into what it is today, was having people roll out. It's like every year since I've sat front row in this industry, the requirements and the RFPs have just doubled every year. It seems like we went from, you've seen it, front row.
But it's not even, so first of all, when you talk about, I was in FAA and hospitals, then I went into mission critical. I promise you, if you're on that airplane or you're in that hospital, that's mission critical.
Exactly.
Right?
Like the hospitals that were performing open heart surgery, brain surgery had to have the same type of reliability we put on our data centers. Right. And that's what I learned first was, putting power on hospitals. And like, I remember the first time I was lighting up it was in Dallas. It was Dell Children's in Dallas or something like that. And I did drop the Missouri Department of Transportation 2 weeks earlier. It doesn't matter. It's Missouri. Right. But the thing is
wait, is Missouri still Missouri?
I know.
I'm just teasing.
Exactly.
I love to give them a hard time because we fly into Kansas City all the time. The Kansas guys give the Missouri guys a hard time. Keep going.
Normally you just try to fly over that state as much as you can, right? So, but I remember that happening because I was not paying close enough attention, got very cavalier, complacency, mediocrity in the way that we prefer. But when I was doing the one in Dallas, I remember putting a megawatt online, and I remember you're in the dungeon of a hospital, and you have the chief of whoever and all of his people are in flank, and they're like, hey, we have like 112 kids up on respirators up there. You sure you got this down? And I was like, holy shit, that's mission critical.
Yeah.
And that's the first time I felt, that whole part is the first time that I locked in and said, hey, I could finally revisit the level of emotional pressure testing I had to endure when I was in the military. And that's when I discovered the love for this. Yeah. But then this industry, as soon as you tried to grab onto what this industry was, it reinvented itself.
Yeah.
At least every quarter right now, but every month back then. Yeah. Would you agree?
Yeah. One of the things that was fun, I didn't know it at the time. I forget who said that youth is wasted on the young. But when I was, 19 years old, 18 years old in the Army, and it was all kind of grab ass until we went to the live fire range. And now you're doing a bounding Overwatch assault on a hill or whatever, and you're with live ammo having to shift fire. And when you've got live 5.56 rounds, mil-spec rounds coming out, and that's all around you, much less the fast movers bringing 500-pound bombs or whatever else is going on, or the heavier ranges, but you're squad level, team level maneuvering, and this stuff is real. All these conversations about, one, you have to take care of the brother or the sister to the left of you and to the right of you, or people are going to get hurt, if not killed, right? We're going to talk about safety, I'm sure, in our industry later, but all of a sudden, the weight of that really hit me. And there's a guy I met very casually in this jump unit that I first started off in. And I'm not going to say his name, but he was super excited to go to this elite unit, and they went to go training in Panama. And he left our unit to go to this elite unit. As I understand the story, he went to Panama. He was 19 or 20 years old, E3. And he got down there and on an exercise got killed by friendly fire. I don't know if it was he moved too far, they didn't shift enough, whatever it is. This is serious, real stuff, right? It's just an accident. When we get ready to jump and you're standing there, you go through all this training, all this other stuff, you role play all these other things, but now you're moving along at 2,500 feet. The doors open to that C-141. I got a funny story about that, but the door is open, and just as, and you're inspecting the risers and the stuff of the person in front of you. Is it correct? Is their stuff tight? Like, this is not a joke anymore.
Yeah.
The person behind you is checking yours. I saw one person in my entire career, thankfully only one, and they survived it, have a almost complete malfunction all the way to the ground. And the last second had a miracle come through and they were able to survive it. But it is no joke. And so when you're down there doing the work that you're doing, that's my kid that's 18 months old, that surgeon needs to not be distracted to save their life. My daughter, one of my daughters got rushed to the hospital. They thought she had RSV, but it turns out it was pneumonia, still pretty serious. But the girl in the room next to her had coded 3 times at 14 months. And if they didn't have a room and a reliable infrastructure, she survived, thankfully. This is so, we always joke about cat videos or whatever, but the stuff that we do is spectacularly important. Anyway, so that became real to me. But in our world, in those early days, even in the co-location world, a customer would come in and they say, look, we've got our own stack. We can manage that. I need a suite from you. A 500 kW suite. In our day, it was like make your year. Like that was unbelievable. That would have been circa 2008, 2009. Couldn't even imagine a 500 kW suite.
Well, they're running 2 kW per rack in those days, probably, right?
2,500 kW a rack. They always, back then, the engineer, we're going to run all 8 kW. No, you're not, even with blade servers or whatever. But still, whether it was a cage environment or a suite environment. So to build that out, to maintain it, like I always say, data centers have to have 3 things. They have to be always on, has to be reliable, safe, always on. Number 2, has to be always available. If you're not always on, you're just a shed.
Yep.
If you're not always available or connected, you're a she shed, which is what happens at my house. And it has to be secure, both logically and physically secure. If you have those 3 things, and you could have the ability to scale, but some people have data centers that are much smaller. I know a number of people in the data center business have 25 or 30 or 50 megawatt data centers. They're not going to get bigger than that. That's the role that they want to play in, and they love those. Some are here in Texas, others in other parts of the world. Whatever the size is, if it's to perform this mission critical role, it has to have those 3 things, for at least for me to call it a data center. So we've watched, but even back then, Kirk, when you were talking about your world, same thing with my world, we had no real tools. The processes and procedures we were trying to figure out then 20 years ago, 15 years ago, are much different now. And so while we're building at massive scale and at massive speed, in some ways it's very similar. There were a lot fewer of us. We didn't have a bunch of Navy nukes. We didn't have a bunch of people that knew MOP, SOP, EOP to the degree that some cultures that are thriving are building it and accelerating it today. We didn't have a lot of tools that we have today. And even some people would say we don't have enough tools, and I don't disagree. But it was just figure it out. It was Wild West. You're a frontier town. You want to have integrity and safety for your citizens and all this other stuff, but you also want an environment that people can scale and grow in if they like your operational excellence. And so we just figured it out. So it was a different kind of hard, but it was still hard.
You know what I always found? I mean, the industry changed so quickly, and between let's say 2005 to 2020. Mm-hmm. Right? Maybe towards the end of 2020 is when we really ended the 4th industrial revolution and started the 5th, right? And in the last iteration, I mean, we first started with on-prem data centers, which were to support these enterprises. And then they realized, hey, I'm wasting money on this. Or really, I think a lot of people were like, look, I can't find enough quality people. Every time that I would hire someone and I would train them to be really good at their program, they would get offered another job for $10,000 a year more by someone else and get recruited away within a year or 2. So it wasn't like you were able to invest into any individual one person if you wanted to be an enterprise and grow your own presence, unless you were going to spend a lot of money to do it and build a big team. Right. So outsourcing it became, it just, in a straight up competition, the OpEx versus CapEx model, the large operators like you guys that were doing big deployments at a time, you could take 20 enterprise customers and put them in a room roof. There's no way that they individually would be able to build, own, and operate at the same price per kW that you could as a wholesaler or even a large retailer. So the industry was shifting, right? And what we also saw was the industry shift even greater when cloud came aboard, because then it did kind of take the biggest bite out of the retail colo market, right? Because those people that had a smaller than 500 kW requirement for IT would just go into a cloud or a virtual environment. Would you agree?
Kind of.
Okay, so let me hear your opinion.
So I think that for sure. So in the early days of the cloud, if you remember, we loved it. We loved the idea because cloud was for test dev, non-secure, no production. Nobody believed, not name Bezos, that it would ever serve any enterprise or production environment, much less the federal government or anything like that. It was for the, he had this excess capacity, so let's make it available, right? When he began building it, so people were attracted to the flexibility of that. They were attracted to giving certain amount of control to parts of the organization that could respond at speed or whatever. So we began building private cloud. I mean, that became the rage for the longest time. We standardized on a vBlock, which is a type of technology with EMC and VMware.
So QTS started, you were once just hosting retail colocation one U at a time. Then you grew into a wholesaler, and then you said, hey, you know what? If you need cloud, we'll provide our own cloud. You didn't bring on the cloud client or as a tenant, and then offer theirs as a growth.
All of it, all of the above. Big social media, big search engines, big cloud environments. Didn't care. Again, they weren't production environments. We didn't see ourselves as competing against them. Organizations came to us and said, we want a cloud-like experience, but I don't want to rent a U from you or a cabinet or a VM within a chassis or whatever. I want to get out of that business, but I can't go to one of these big cloud providers, the only cloud provider at the time. I need it more. It's like having your own private instance of a chat GPT or something. Like I want the opportunity for this, but it needs to be private and these other things. So there were a number of organizations that responded to that. We were very sophisticated in that space. And so we built out private DR environments. We built out our whole back end. So one of the cool things about our legacy, and it sounds like an infomercial for our organization, there are other organizations that were trying to do this, but we didn't come from like the big wholesale broker real estate world. That is not our legacy or our world. Just ping power pipe. While we were owned by a telecom, the original people that built us and ran us, their vision was this IT stack world. But the genius was we had these telecom experts, like super nerd heads, like even within a submarine of a bunch of nerds, you got Marines in there, you got everybody else in there. And you got the people that can tune that prop and that engine. Like you've got a group of a whole body that all perform, these organs perform different functions. So we had these genius telecom people that would convince, this is, I think, really smart things about our leadership. They would come back and say, look, we need to have diverse fiber. It wasn't being asked for in RFPs yet. You got to have diverse fiber routes. You got to have all.
Oh, so they were pressure testing their own vulnerabilities and looking for their own blind spots.
Because they knew it from the telecom days. And they said, we got to, and they would go back to the telecom providers. I need to trace, long before any tools were available, trace routes back to multiple carrier hotels, not just this. So this ecosystem, not just within a data center and the data center proper, but externally. So we had the telecom expertise for that. We had the IT stack for that. No single points of failure within the IT stack. We had the data center experts. We just ended up, blessed by God, miracle, whatever you think, of these groups of, it'd be like forming a team, and you've got Earl Campbell in your offense, and Bo Jackson, and you got Dick Butkus or whoever over here in defense, and you got how did you end up? It's like the 49ers back in the day under Bill Walsh. It's the original.
Well, you guys had Tesh was there, right?
Tesh came later. Eric Jacobs, all these people.
There's a lot of talent from there, yeah.
Right? We've had some success, not success. But my point is that, so we had these things at the fundamental level without any names, Dave McCall's or our CEO or Tag Greason or any of these folks. But this was the fundamental connector of all of us. And so we had these areas of expertise. So in early cloud, it was, we loved it. We'll build you a private infrastructure. That's great money. We had the expertise for it. At the same time, people were coming to us and saying, we're building our own cloud for ourselves or for us to serve to the city of Atlanta or whatever. And I want 500 kW, or God forbid, they wanted a megawatt at 2.5 or 3 kW a rack.
That made you a year.
Of their own space. That was fantastic. So, but we would build this suites, we'd build this infrastructure. So we had these things going on at the same time. What we applied to all of them, though, was operational maturity, operational discipline, operational excellence. We began attracting people that really love this idea of SOP, MOP, EOP, like this language of how do you do it. When
you were attracting them, where were you finding them? Universities?
No, in the beginning, it was like
military?
You gravitate a lot of
Trades.
military, but it was a lot of trade people. But it's
wasn't
who
like
you
your
know.
founding CEO West Point grad, or maybe there's one at
No, that was so that's Tag Greases. So my founding CEO is a spectacular entrepreneurial minded guy from Overland Park, Kansas, or from Kansas. But Tag came on board in 2011. He is a West Point grad. What we find that we have in common, the people that do the best, that we have community with the best at our organization, are those people that are entrepreneurial minded. They're hardworking. It's like being a farmer. You're most of the time of being a farmer is not harvest time. It's not planting time. It's managing, right? You're managing the infrastructure. But when it's time to plant, you plant. But if you're doing it by yourself, you're going to fail. When it's time to harvest, you get the whole community to harvest. You move from farm to farm to farm. When you plant, you do it as a group. You maintain the fence and the plow, whatever, individually, but you've got to have these strong communities. And so we have that at our organization. The people that have lasted, some of them, now the industry is a real industry. And so it's not that they changed their mind. They just had an opportunity to grow or do something different or whatever.
Rebuild the industry.
Mentioned Eric, who's over at Aligned. And we have, many people that are at all the groups, right? But we have that in common, and they're successful at those other organizations as well. But in those early days, we called it wholesale. Later, we called it enterprise. Now we called it hyperscale. Now it's gigascale, whatever it is. But it's been these dual pressures of this sort of retail side of things, this enterprise side of things, Fortune 1000, whatever it is that they're asking for, and then the Fortune 10, whatever they're asking for, which is a different speed and scale. And now we're going through a very unusual thing. But as we responded to the cloud and all of that, we embraced it. But really probably 2017, certainly by 2018, we realized the public clouds now that can be secured, that are sophisticated, that there's multiple competitors. How do we not get married to any particular technology? We're married to serving our customers. We're married to providing a certain operational experience and a certain customer experience. We're married to those things and culture. We're not married to this. And so we realized staying in this world was not a world for us. So we sold that part of our business. And then we just focused on what we would call enterprise. And actually, we divided into two things. We call it hyperscale and enterprise. Hyperscale could be a federal customer. It could be one of these big organizations that we all know in our industry. And then enterprise is the rest of the Fortune 2000.
So you guys went public. Walk me through what that was like. And because 2013,
we went public. Yeah.
But there was already a correction in the market by then, right? Where like I said, I felt, and you were like, kinda, I felt that cloud kind of really popped the balloon for most of the retail colo. You still have your carrier hotels where connectivity is the primary product, but retail kind of, I felt there was a pivot point where there was at least a correction in pricing where you would be doing $275 a kW all-in pricing or $300 a kW per rack or something like that. And then you'd come back and they're like $125 a kW now.
Sure.
Plus E.
Sure.
And there was a big correction. That happened probably before that 2013. So you guys had rode out that correction in the market that everyone had to kind of...
But here's where it didn't hit us. So here's the difference. If all you were offering, back then we called them the 3 Cs. If we had this service industry business, private cloud, all this other stuff that I talked about, and it had grown and grown and grown, like it was super sticky. Or we had enterprise colocation, which we priced by the branch circuit or the whip. And then we had this wholesale thing. But we didn't start off in the enterprise wholesale world. So that was all net add to us. So even if it was dropping from 150, 200 and whatever a kW, I wasn't overcoming some big market change. I was getting an opportunity that we hadn't had before because they just thought of us as a retail colocation. We saw that there was an opportunity over there. We already, we were primarily brownfield back then. Today we're primarily greenfield, but we were converting. Here's how you could do it. Chad Williams, this is where he's a genius. There's a chip fab in Richmond. People were like, back then, 2010, whatever, like,
oh, yeah, yes. I know exactly.
Actually, let me go back forward. 2007.
I've been in that building.
We have 1 million square foot, there's a 1 million square foot facility in Atlanta million square feet with in an N+1 configuration, 80 megawatt substation on it. Remember, this is 2007. It was the old Sears and Roebuck facility. They built what's called a 200-year building, which is how we think of all of our buildings. But when Sears built it in the 50s and into the early 60s, the concrete columns, of which there are thousands, are like 3 feet by 3 feet. Like this thing probably couldn't survive a direct nuclear strike, but anything else. Like it's unbelievable. There was a small SunGard presence that was on its way out there, but this thing was massive.
And they built it for who?
They built it, Sears, for themselves. Anything that came out of a Sears catalog east of the Mississippi came out of that facility. All Sears mechanics in the United States were trained at that facility. It was one of the original, if I understand my story correctly, it was the original place Dr. Martin Luther King was invited to speak to any business in the city of Atlanta. It was a historical thing, and it was all but mothballed. They'd used it for storage during the Olympics in the 90s in Georgia. My CEO goes down there, looks at this place and says, do you know what we could do with this? And people are like, nothing. Like, what are you going to do with this thing? He said, this could be a data center. So he bought it for pennies. And the whole world, Kirk, laughed at us. Like, what are you doing? He's like, look at the unbelievable. Are we going to make less data? Like, the more we use as human beings, the more we want. The more we want, the more we make. The more we make, the more we use. Like, what's this screen? 8K? 5 years ago, if you put the TV on here, this whole thing would flip. And now you got a 48-inch 8K TV. And in 2 years from now in your studio, you'll be able to see the hair on the pimple of the water buffaloes is being eaten by the lion. Like
and you'll be pissed if you can't.
Right? I want to hear
I
want to hear the mosquito land on it. Like, that's our nature. So he bought this thing, and the whole world laughed at us. There was limited, but we had hundreds of hardened conduit pipes, even though they weren't full.
Stainless steel and copper.
Unbelievable. He's like, you cannot. There's a term in real estate that I've learned. Basis is forever, right? This is base, this foundational. This building's going to last forever. This copper that goes to these multiple carrier hotels is forever. Atlanta, Georgia, even if I could see maybe Nova, which was not really a huge thing yet. To telecom people, it was. Cloud emerging. This is 2007. This is not production cloud. So we buy this facility. We're on our 4th building on their campus. Hundreds and hundreds of megawatts. It's not even our big campus in Georgia anymore. Go to Richmond, Virginia. There's a chip fab there, multi-billion-dollar chip fab. And the whole chip manufacturing stuff is moved to Malaysia or Indonesia, somewhere else. And they've mothballed it. It's a skeleton crew led by Dave Roby, who's our COO today. Few dozen people there, 50 megawatt, it's a 100 megawatt substation, but it's 50 megawatt in an N+1, 2N configuration. But the whole thing could be doubled. Everything could be doubled. And people are like, so who cares if it could be doubled? It's Richmond, Virginia.
Who wants to be
You have like an AOL, POTS line from, wherever it was down to this place. There's nothing there. Chad, basis forever. So he put out to the real estate community, we're going to show up and we're going to buy this thing out of bankruptcy for hundreds of millions of dollars. Nobody shows up. So they buy $1 billion facility for $12 million. And then they recycle all the copper in it and get their money back.
Between the copper and the stainless steel, I heard you guys
got all the money back. And now we cannot expand it.
Yeah.
Fast enough. And hyperscales are in the area. Major banks and the federal government and the sea cable landed up in Virginia Beach. Same thing, Chicago Sun-Times building. Same thing here and over and over and over. Lucky, I guess. But and I don't mean that with arrogance, maybe a little bit of swagger, but you just keep looking for opportunities as hard things came to us. So 2007, 2008, even 2013 when we went public, what's the opportunity in front of us? And we were expanding that IT cloud infrastructure. We were connecting to on-ramps to public clouds. We were expanding DR between sites, all of this heavy, and at the same time, building our sophistication in, Tesh came on. He helped us. Tag came on shortly after with Tesh and took over and built that out. So we're building this wholesale world while we're building the very sticky world until we saw that this is actually pivoting in the same way that maybe some of the really original real estate people saw wholesale changing. We saw this whole cloud and whatever world changing. We're like, in order to focus on that. It's going to require a level of commitment and expertise that we feel like is better served by another organization. Let's us focus on enterprise, hyper.
Did you guys spun that side of the business out then?
We did. We sold it all. Yeah.
Do they still collaborate with you guys, or are they
sometimes? But we're not. Sometimes. So they operate those environments. But that was in 2018 when we sold that off. So 6 years ago. But it's and so it just allowed us, as we did again, we've refocused a couple times. A lot of the same people, same culture, same attitude. So we just keep looking at the opportunities. What are the opportunities? There were no big single tenants. Maybe by 2020 you'd take down an entire data hall, but we had to pioneer. How do you? The hyperscale started coming to us and saying, once they began experiencing sort of a servant's heart. I joke about it all the time, but coming out of the landlord business, here's your opportunity for a contract. You can have a contract with somebody who comes from a real estate background that's a landlord. And unless you can walk on water, I really don't want the word Lord worked into our contract. Or he comes with somebody that's got sort of this servant experience, very transparent on after action reports, on all these other things. That's what our reputation was built on. So we did all of that. And so as we moved more and more into the enterprise and hyperscale and wholesale space, we just brought all of that same DNA. And it served us well. And, scale, speed, things are growing ever larger. We don't know. But whether we're building a facility that looks like a customer will take down, but we had to develop tools on how do we demise people's information in a multi-tenant world. It didn't exist back then. So we built all that back-end infrastructure with API information so we could feed it up to these big organizations in our environment.
At that time, when you started, Overland Park and Georgia were the two primary facilities, so that people know, and people don't realize that there was a time where you guys were one of the largest publicly traded mission-critical REITs in the world, right? And then you were taken private by Blackstone. Was it like $10 billion or something like that? It was something big.
$10 billion.
And then in that time, how many?
And that was in 2021.
How many facilities do you guys have? How many markets you guys in? Or you guys operate outside the United States?
We operate out. We're in Europe now. We're in the Netherlands, and it was publicly announced on Data Center Dynamics and other places. We've got a big campus we're building out in the UK. We went private in 2021. A number of other organizations have since then.
Cyrus One did as well.
And but anyway, we either have in progress, are fully operational, or near to be released 60-ish or so data centers.
60 more.
Yeah, out of that one little site in Suwanee, Georgia.
Isn't that crazy? What was the biggest shift in the last 6 years for you then? So coming off of 2021, 2022 is probably where things really started pivoting the most, I think, in my opinion. But walk me through some of the things in your chapter and draw parallels to those with what you were doing, because there are people that are going to be listening because they want to know everything there is to know about QTS. There are some people that are going to be listening because they're going to be like, look, maybe they weren't playing video games like car racing and shit like that, but most of the people that are in this industry didn't know what industry they were falling into because they didn't understand intentionally and deliberately what they were looking at.
Yeah.
It was, hey man, I have a cousin, a friend, someone I served with, someone I went to college with, something like that. I have an uncle or an aunt or a cousin. And next thing you know, they're over here and they're like, what is really going on over here? Because we haven't arrived to the point as a mainstream industry to where we have, it's not like oil and gas or healthcare or law or legal, where there's ethics and governance and all kinds of rules that are massively compliant, driven, based at a federalized level where we self-govern as an industry, right? So I do think some of the people that have been in this industry for the last 20 to 30 years, as they do begin to sunset, if they're not going to work for the Digital Bridges of the world, where they'll aggregate and consolidate a lot of the market and make it an even smaller oligopoly of an industry, what you'll see is them move towards the policy making side of things, where they create rules of governance for us so that we can standardize as an industry. Because think about it, how many people are in this industry right now? 3 million people. Almost none of them went to college to study this. And most of the kids that are going to ever be a part of the Gen Z side that join this workforce, some of them, the jobs that they're going to have haven't even been invented yet.
Right.
So wrap your mind around what you saw in the last, 4 to 6 years is you see it transforming from the Internet of Things, on-prem to outsourced colocation, to now cloud, and then now AI, right? And those are there's more than just 3 different types. There's carrier hotels. There's 3 different types of AI data centers, but there are so many different types of things. What are you seeing? What did you anticipate? And what are you seeing coming down the line?
I don't think I really thought about the question about what I anticipate. I think it was, not I think, I know it was, at least in my case, I have an aptitude and an attitude within this technology that started off as the IT stack and moved into, so my role at QTS, I became a solution engineer for 4 or 5 years. Then I became the leader of the solution engineering group for 4 or 5 years. And interestingly, during that time, I had spent a lot of time in virtualization and cloud. It wasn't my first love. The data center hyperscale was my first love. And that's where as I moved to, if there's an opportunity for me, both as an SE and later as an SE leader, I wanted to concentrate on that. I love the size of the deals. We got to do a deal in early days with Nokia, and Nokia was pretty significant back then. And it was just negotiating an international frame agreement. And I remember them coming to us as a courtesy. They had bought a local provider and said, look, we already have an international frame agreement with a big competitor of yours. It might have been Equinix or Digital. I don't remember which one. They said, so we're just coming to visit as a formality. We're not actually going to do business with you guys. We said, just come and do a tour. Come and meet our team. Long story short, a little over a year later, we were their exclusive provider, and they worked out of the other organizations to join our organization. No disrespect to them. It's just a different experience with us. Sure. And they wanted to replicate that experience wherever they could. Where we weren't, they stayed with whoever they were already with. And when I got a taste of that, my buddy Tim Keister, who's head of counsel over at Stack now, he and I and another buddy of mine, Tim Huffman, who CEO of his own not data center organization, but he was at CBRE for a while.
Sure, he's in the game.
Things, yeah. He's a really smart guy. The 3 of us in the early days when I was an SE, that was just like opening my mind.
How bag the deals they could get, you mean? How complicated they were? Or the ramps?
That's right. We didn't know what metered power was. We didn't know what, we had no concept. We just figured it out.
Dedicated buildings.
We got much more sophisticated, and we hired more sophisticated people. We've talked about some of them already that knew this, that were already familiar with it, and so we got an injection not of esprit de corps, but of sophistication around the lexicon, the language, the acronyms, the what's expected. How do you do? We didn't call it PUE yet, but it was operational uplifts, what later we call PUE, and the contracts, all this other stuff. So anyway, as we moved that, at least for me over time, what I realized, sort of this existential idea, what are we building? I don't know if all people go through this at some age or whatever, like what am I doing? What's my purpose or whatever? And on the broader is to serve each other, which I realized over time, I really resonated with that before I got in the data center business. But how do I serve my neighbor? Like, how do I do these things? So when you're in critical infrastructure, whether you're in your manufacturing or healthcare or whatever, there's a segment of the world that you're serving. But if you're in data center, what idea on earth doesn't live in a data center?
Everything goes back to
there's no idea. There's no MRI image. There's no battle plan. There's no sermon. There's no music. If you're an artist coming out of school and you really don't know what you want to do, but you want to spin up your own shop on making sneakers that you're going to send over to the 3D print. You're going to allow people to interact with your app, your LLM, whatever, to create and all these other things. The idea of the entire world lives in a data center. You talk about oil and gas, you talk about all these other mission critical, everything is connected in some way to a data center today. If that's true, it makes it the most valuable real estate on earth. If it's the most valuable real estate,
it's not real estate, it's a utility.
Whatever it is. So it has to be always on, has to be always available, and it has to be secure, right? And so as far as I'm concerned, what I believe, at least my work purpose anyway, And our organization's purpose is, how do we make that happen and be good stewards? Like, need to be good stewards with the environment. I need to be good stewards with my people. I need to make sure that I have a diverse workforce. I need to make sure they're paid equitably. I need to make sure that we're concerned about mental health. So it sounds very esoteric, but as we're moving and we've realized we're so consequential to the fabric, not of the United States, but to the world, this is important stuff. And so we need to make sure we're making them, designing them, building them, operating them in a certain way. And as I've seen these things, as technology's impacted these, you just see, what's the new hockey stick today? So at any of these eras, 2005, we saw it. 2000 and back in our IT world, when so many people were like, I cannot afford my own IT stack in my office. I just can't afford it. Or I've got one person running between 10 medical offices because they've got to be diverse. They've got to be all these other things for compliance and all this other stuff. But if I could put them in 2 data centers, and my team now is just running between those things, and I can hire a data center company that can supplement them with firewall management or whatever. Well, now I didn't fire anybody, and I've got to concentrate it on these.
Outsource all the risk.
I've outsourced the majority of the risk. The only thing I'm responsible for is the integrity of my data, not the infrastructure that the data lives in. And every iteration since then, cloud, non-cloud, whatever it is, how do I do that? Availability zones used to be the big thing. And now there's so much. I remember when these big hyperscalers would come in and all of their environments would be in a data center or 2. So they had to be in disparate locations within the facility or within the metropolitan area, and the redundancy that was all built into the machines. Now that's not, they run them in a chicken coop because the resilience is metropolitan areas distributed, right? Yeah. They don't necessarily have a 2 millisecond sensitivity. Now they will for inference and for some other things. There are for sure some workloads in a data center that's true of, but for many of them, not just big AI learning modules, but for many of them, I need diversity, but I can have it in Chicago, I can have it in Dallas, I can have it in Atlanta.
Can you do, that's not metroactive replication because the latencies won't allow.
You don't need to do the metroactive replication anymore. They've evolved these systems and the application so much that they don't even need to do that anymore.
It's funny that you say that, right? Because this is the part where I want to go into some next gen stuff or the future type of stuff. And then I want to talk about the stuff that I think we both share a lot of passion for, and that's helping people. That's the leadership side of what we do, really trying to figure out how we take care of ourselves and use this technology. I mean, I love this technology. At some point, everyone got in this space because they're a nerd. They have an interest in something, or someone said, hey, you can make a few bucks in this space.
Or they had nowhere else to go.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think that there's a lot of curious people. There's a lot of former military that are in this space, but that's because former military represent 1/2 of the U.S. population that take an oath, right? That's not common. Those are explorers. They're not pioneers, but they're willing to go take new risks. And I mean, if you're a nerd, I tell people, I told my kids, if you're really into technology, why in hell would you go to college? What you learn today would be obsolete by the time you graduate. Why didn't you go to the military, where the most advanced weapons, machinery, and technology on this earth is in the military, in the hands of national defense and intelligence. But at least there, you could be a kid my age driving a multi-billion-dollar warship, right? So, or doing the things that you were doing, right? I just think that there's a lot of ways for people to get here. I look at the next gen data centers, and I just did a podcast with another CEO, and that podcast will come out in a little bit. And he really came from the opposite side of us, where we're in this, data center 2.0 model, 3.0 model, getting to AI data centers standards, and they're coming from almost the Bitcoining side and going backwards, literally backwards in terms of the level of density that they require at that level of technology, right? And they're like, why can't we remove certain components from the electrical permutation? Because we don't really need them. Just like what you're saying, I don't need metroactive replication anymore because I'm building so much redundancy and reliability at these other layers of my infrastructure that I don't necessarily need a tier 3 or a tier, anything above that in terms of my infrastructure on my physical data center on the MEP perspective. And on this side, I only need this and this and this from a latency perspective because the AI data centers aren't as latency sensitive. So now I'm talking about I think that it'll be led by the largest hyperscalers and some of those baby scalers that follow them in the way that they make purchasing decisions. But I think that there will be some things being removed now, and you'll see the operators able to adopt that same de-escalation of standards, right? Because it's untenable. We have too many needs to support the adoption of emerging technology, right? And one of two things will have to happen. People will have to stop using technology as much as they do.
Which we know is not going to happen.
Not going to happen. Or we need to find an alternative use for energy. And the reason why I love this industry is I believe the next generation of data centers will not only support the demand of the surge of AI, but it'll force us to recognize that the demand on energy that it places is untenable. And we'll have to view natural gas and those other renewables as a bridge or a stepping stone to get us to something that'll have a major transformation on humanity, like shifting to nuclear. And there's a 75-plus-year-old nuclear navy that has 34 different types of nuclear propulsion and power plants that have demonstrated the ability to operate these things without having them melt down. Right. So we know that the technology is not brand new. These SMRs have been out there for a long time. I think that you're going to see a shift of lots of things taking place. And like, this is why I love having these conversations with you, because we don't have to agree on a lot of things, but we see it from a different perspective, right? I just see that you're going to see a shift in the way that markets that we put these things in, third tier markets that aren't latency sensitive, but have massive aggregate land or capacity for natural gas or other renewables, and the ability to scale there, with knowing that we're scaling in density and not footprint wise. So I don't need as much real estate. I just need as much power as I could get. And I could repurpose distressed assets in some markets, like what Josh Snowhorn did with Quantum, Loophole.
Very smart thing.
Look, it's
smart guy.
But he also was doing something good.
Who's the CTO?
Noteboom, Scott Noteboom.
Yeah. Another guy's super smart guy.
He's a monster of a human being. His hands are as big as this thing right here. But
I've only casually talked to him a couple times, but I'm like, there's not very many people much bigger than me.
I refused to stand next to him. I felt he was like Shaquille O'Neal with his kid or something.
I know, but what's the bummer is, it's not just that he's one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. It's just a bummer that he's a big dude.
But he's a badass in jiu-jitsu.
Well, I didn't know that. I didn't need to know that too.
He can take
but
you
it's just, he doesn't need to. Yeah. He doesn't need ChatGPT. He'll outthink me and he'll beat me with his mind powers before. But anyway, you're saying yes. So they're
super smart guy. He's been here. But what they were doing was there's an ESG element. We do want to do good by people. We're going to go into markets.
We have to do good, right?
We want to, right? Yeah. But we also, look, consumers don't realize that they're staring down the barrel of potential interruptions to their future rate of adoption. Things could be throttled down, perhaps, if we don't have the ability to prioritize what's going to get this power first. Is it going to be the ER room so we can perform advanced technology services to extend the longevity of life? There's going to have to be an element to that. If the CEO of JP Morgan Chase says that Gen Alpha's children will live to be 150 years old because of modern technology and will only work a 3-day work week. So we are going to adopt technology in a healthier, more harmonious way. I think that data centers are going to become less redundant on the electrical side, but more capable on the mechanical or the cooling side. And I think that in the next few years, it'll be the primary engine of industry for the world. And I think that either people that aren't already working directly in this industry will work in orbit of this industry, or in an adjacent industry that's directly in support of what we're doing. Because like you said, our industry grows faster than every other industry because of every other industry, because every industry's need for technology at the end of the day ends up in a data center, or it ends up in a cloud, which guess what? Ends up in a data center. And those data centers are sometimes the same buildings that are supporting the engine for AI, right? So I see this huge shift. The consumer is going to have to evolve. The way that we approach power is going to have to change. And then the way that we deliver these products is going to have to change as well, right? And with that will become a little bit of redundancy or reliability on the infrastructure, the technical infrastructure, the physical infrastructure on MEP, but there will be other technology applications from the network above that'll make it to where we can withstand that. Don't you agree?
Yes. Let me back up, though, something that you said I thought was interesting, and it may come to pass, but it is When was your first personal computer that you bought? Do you remember what it was or when was it?
So I'm a dope. I didn't buy mine until I got out of the Navy in 2000.
Okay, 2000.
But yeah, I bought a Gateway computer.
You got a Gateway computer. I bought mine through American Express.
Okay.
I probably paid $3,000 and 36 months worth of payments for a computer that's probably worth $1,200. Yeah. I remember my dad going with him when I was home on leave one time in the middle 80s. He went to a place called Computerland, long since gone, and we brought home this big IBM XT, which is dual floppy drives, came with a dot matrix printer. That if that dot matrix printer kicked off today, this whole studio would go into the active shooter protocol, like just. But the capacity of that hard drive, I don't remember what his was, but mine was 40 megabytes, right? So tiny. Do you know what size that was? It was
size of a toaster, probably.
No, the hard drive was the exact same size for 20-something years, even when they were up into the gigabytes, until they went to the SSDs that we do now. I just upgraded the memory in my laptop, which was like the size of a piece of chewing gum. And it's, I don't even know how many gigabytes it is, or terabytes rather. But forever, until technology changed, the footprint of these hard drives were the exact same, even though the number of platters, the density, the speed exponentially changed, the power supply changed. And here's why. When we talk about these data centers that are going to become much more dense, instead of needing a megawatt distributed across at 3 kW a rack, they're going to be 100 kW a rack. Maybe they'll get more dense. I still think there's going to be a very broad mix of applications. Not everything is going to be a big training module or whatever. At least that's what I see.
So you think we'll change what the product is over time, where we'll have different components on the infrastructure side, at least from the electrical side, potentially on the mechanical side?
Sure. But back to your point about resiliency, I think it will become depends on the application, right? If it's that hospital or the sheriff 911 system, or even the sewage system in your community, is that going to be allowed to just run on a product whose resiliency is multiple states? No, because it all lives within that county. And so the resiliency has to be in that facility for data sovereignty, for risk, for whatever. It can't leave that one or two facilities in that immediate area. And so there's going to have to remain resiliency. Now, would it be you have a backup UPS infrastructure or standby diesel or whatever the standby is, the size of the entire environment? Maybe not. I don't know. But a lot of these massive cloud environments, general cloud environments, even production cloud environments, don't require that anymore. And so what they're saying is, hey, deliver us a resiliency in an end configuration. But I really think they're going to carve out segments. My fiber core, it has to be at least in an M+1.
Yeah, that can make sense. I can see how they categorize and bucketize certain elements of what they do.
Right.
But let's shift off this, right? Because I love, the first part of this is I really wanted to, I don't need to humanize you, right? You have your own podcast. What's the name of your podcast again?
The QTS Experience.
That's right. So for those that are listening, I encourage you to listen and subscribe. I know I do. And I've learned a lot by listening to some of the people that you bring on. I admire how you bring on a lot of people from outside the industry who are subject matter experts. You were telling me like people that won the Nobel Prize, but our industry needs that too, right? We need to be constantly pushing and introducing technologists from the outside of our industry into ours and maybe literally introducing them for the first time. But I think that people are growing more aware of this. AI is making the term data center much more prevalent. It's in the Wall Street Journal once a week now. It's going to be one of those terms that gets adopted, much like cloud did, but people still don't necessarily understand what cloud is, but soon everyone will understand that more effectively because AI will demand that they understand the differences between those two technologies. And then I love hearing your personal journey and how you got to where you're at. The things that inspire you inspire me. The things that you're a nerd about, I'm a nerd about as well. But there's things that we also share, like as an example, like it's really important for me where I work, what I do with my time, right? I can't imagine, I wish I always felt like that. I wish I was always smart enough to protect myself enough to know that I need to always do things that are in my highest good. But I need to feel inspired by what I do. I need to feel safe in the environment I work in, at least politically. And I need to be fulfilled by what I'm doing. I mean, I got to be doing something in service of my purpose.
Yeah.
You've been at QTS since the beginning of the time. You bleed QTS rad. So what keeps you there? And then let's talk about that. And then I'd like to double tap off that a little bit back in some of the other things that we both care a lot about.
Sure. First of all, I believe in the just cause of the data center business. So I want to stay in this business for as long as I can, as long as they'll have me, whatever my role is. A couple years into what was then QTS, I don't know why in my subconscious, I'm convinced, I used to think it was some trauma as an adult, but it's probably something as a kid. But whatever the trigger was, I found myself in a mental health crisis. I realized one day I'm responsible for, my role had been changed sometimes, and this isn't the fault of my organization. You know, hey, look, we have hey, soldier, we don't need you to be the 203 gunner anymore or the whatever you're at the sub. I need you to go do this. And sometimes you can see your purpose in that mission, and other times you don't see yourself in that mission. It's beneath you, it's above you, whatever. In my case, I don't know what the trigger was. It wasn't obvious on the surface. I still don't know entirely what it was, but something clicked in my brain and a level of fear overcame me.
Like imposter syndrome stuff from a leadership role?
Like I was like, I have no real money to move back to Texas, where I had moved here from. In this new role that they put me in, I don't think I'm going to be able to perform it. This is before I was a solution engineer. I'd become a systems architect. And I don't think it was systems architect. I'm usually, as I've said in my history, here's curious nerd, let's figure it out. I was with really smart, capable people. We were in charge with building out storage infrastructure, which I'd never done before. I didn't know anything really about it, other than I was a customer of it. But whatever the things were, didn't have confidence in, leadership. And it wasn't my CEO or any of those other things. I just felt myself. And back in those early days, our CEO, Chad, was out busy just trying to make sure we met payroll. Like it was our president that we saw. Whatever the circumstances were, it's not anyone's beat. But something tripped in my mind, and I got so afraid. I literally just got paralyzed. I remember one Sunday morning, I didn't want to go to work. I had this monster fear. I had these 3 little daughters, 3 little babies. I just thought I was going to fail. Whatever the boogeyman was, it overwhelmed me, and I didn't know how to move. And I got so scared. I didn't have any ideation, but I could see how I could get to it. And I didn't know where it came from. I didn't know how to battle any of this. And I went to my then boss, a guy named Randall Poole, still with QTS. He's one of the guys who interviewed me. When I first started QTS, we started off as peers. But as we became QTS, I ended up working in his organization, genius guy. And I called him up on a Sunday and said, can I come to your house? He's like, oh, okay. So he let me come up there, and I sat on his couch talking to him, and I just cried like a baby. I was so afraid, and I really couldn't even articulate what I was afraid of. And then that Monday, I went to our then CTO, who Randall rolled up to, Brian, and very similar thing. I was trying to tell them what I was going through. I had no words. I didn't know. But I was just so afraid I was going to fail. I was going to lose everything. I wasn't going to perform a good job. Then what was I going to do? Just like this runaway train of fear. And they gave me room I went to a therapist. I got on medicine, and it took a while. It took months. I remember sitting next to my buddy, Tim Sanchez, another Navy guy. He's not with QTS anymore. He's become an IT contractor. He owns a trawler that he's converted into, and he and his girlfriend, it's the funniest, greatest story. Only Tim could pull it off. It's like, let's go see the world. But Tim would let me sit next to him in the knock working on my paperwork and whatever at the time. And I was just I needed a heart and mind reset. It took me a few months. And my organization, we had the ability at the time to let me, one, they didn't make it public to the whole world. And two, within the parameters of that, we had enough margin. They didn't know who or what I was going to become. I was an employee. Yeah, I was an original employee. We weren't a large team, maybe 150 people at the time. And there were a couple other significant people there who knew what was going on. But they gave me time to process through with professional help, personal help. And my imagination on my lack of support was just that. It was imagination. But those fears, they're real in your head. Those things that trip you up, still don't know where they came from exactly. I know the surface things, but it wasn't true. And I had to go through professional help to work through what is true and what's not true, and medicine. And now I look at it as one of the greatest blessings of all time to me, because it gave me a respect for real fear that you wish you could just take your pill or pray it away, or just sit down in a circle and just, when you leave, you're like, okay, God's got this, or my meditation has resolved it, or this pill's taking care of it. I used to say the blue pill. Now that evidently means something else. So I don't know but going through that created a spectacular affection for my teammates, just like in the people I fell in love with in the service. It gave me a spectacular affection. Some of my customers, they didn't know the whole story, but they knew some of the story, and they were very patient with me. And it just created in me a tremendous affection for my organization.
Who stood by you when it's funny, right? And I hate interrupting you, but I do feel like this is a part worth putting a pin in, and I'll tell you why. I believe the industry is growing so aggressively and so quickly that we talk about the silver tsunami. We've talked about that multiple times, where half our workforce has
Who's silver in this conversation? Are you and I silver?
Both of us, yes. Unfortunately, we both started this game. We had dark hair. Right. But the thing is, I've been in this game for more than 20. You've been in this game for more than 20. More than half our industry has been in here for more than 20. Some have been in here for 30. And at the end of the day, it won't take much for them to eventually start retiring in waves in the next few years. Like I said, Gen Z's on track to outnumber baby boomers in the workforce before the end of this year. And I think that as we grow, you're going to see businesses having to look at two things. Do I fix the cogs of my machine, or do I replace it? Right. And we are pieces of the cog, the cost of goods sold, I guess you could say it. But some companies will intentionally and deliberately not invest into fixing people that are struggling with the circumstances of human nature in their personal lives, because it has a negative impact on the output and productivity of their team. Mm-hmm. And I think that it takes, from what I'm told, you guys have a very strong culture, right? A culture that's predicated on a lot of strong morals too, mm-hmm. right? And it's no surprise to me to hear that, based on what I've heard about your management team, is that I'm not surprised at all that they didn't throw you out or remove you because you weren't able to operate at whatever the standard was for them at that time. They saw that you were hurting, and they gave you what mm-hmm. you needed in terms of time, the most mm-hmm. valuable commodity on earth, mm-hmm. to go get right with yourself. And that paid dividends for them in the long term. Look at the loyalty they have now, right? Rightfully placed. I mean, that's what they're looking out for you. You got to look out for them too, right? And that's what I think is very special and unique. And that's building culture, and having you outline it and draw it out like that. Really, it should inspire other leaders to understand two things. The industry is going to grow so fast that people that are going to struggle personally, they're not going to fix them. They're going to outsource them, or they're going to replace them with someone that can. And that may happen as a 2 to 3 month evolution, where that every 2 to 3 months, people are just getting burned out and we're just going to replace them. Right. I'm trying to build a labor incubator against that, to say, hey, cool, if they work for me, if you want them, that's great. But if they get burned out on yours, I'm going to take them back. They still work for me. Right. And I'll go find a program where they can be better at it. If they need a month or two off to get right. We'll pencil that in. Right. It's part of our margin. Right. But there has to be we have to take all of this amazing technology that we build, and we have to use it to find a better way for us to have a healthier and a more harmonious relationship with that which we do. I love what we do. I'm addicted to what we do. This industry is infectious with how much new stuff it offers us, how many new opportunities to be challenged it offers us every day. Yeah. But it's easy to rip out and replace people. It's hard to invest into
it. Appears easy. It's not always easy. The consequences are, look, I love my company. I'm not a true believer. It's not a cult. I love my company. I love my CEO. I love many of the leaders in our organization. And I've been around long enough that not everybody who works with each other gets along, sees it the same way. Some, it's their idea to leave. Others, they leave because of opportunity. Others believe, they're invited to leave. I'm not naive. You're not naive. Things happen. But there is organizations that have a focus on and a healthy appreciation, like a purposeful appreciation for community, whatever you want to call it. I'm almost reluctant to say wellness because I think that word in many cases has been co-opted. You have to build into margin. It's difficult to do. Look at QTS. We've been a small organization where my CEO, with his funding from small town Kansas, floated us. And from then till now, my CFO will probably still say, look, we're building billion-dollar facilities. You mentioned dozens of them are in flight right now. Like, it's the number's different, but it's like this is a fully operational, challenging thing. But what else are we doing it for? So I'm not trying to make a company like a person, right? To where it's like you can look at great organizations, great nation states throughout the history of the world where they get culture right, and it leads overall to human flourishing. There may be micro instances where they don't get it right, and you repent and you restore. But overall, for the vast majority, they get it right. And that's what we should be about. One of the things that I really like, at least in our organization and other organizations that are thriving, I think, Kirk, are you learn in a row. If I'm a bunch of cops about to go out on a beat, I'm sitting there in the room and I'm getting the information. Or if I'm a bunch of engineers, I get lecture to, or a student or whatever. But you build community in a circle. You do not build community. You build community with your soldiers or with your sailors or with your airmen in a circle. The messy parts, the funny parts, the good parts. And we try to build those circles because we know the tech's going to change. We know, but our just cause doesn't change. How we're serving each other, how we're serving the community, that stays the same. And every now and then we have to call each other to accountability internally. And sometimes we get called externally. That's okay. It's part of life. Nobody's perfect. But if you have that culture as part of your DNA, I think overall. So in my journey, that happened. And one of the great blessings, it wasn't just at QTS, and I just don't even know if they knew what to do with me, but they helped me. And I've seen this happen over and over and over. I would like to say it happens every time, maybe not every time, but it's the normal experience of my experience in my circle of influence there. But that's part of our culture. It is, though, look, we're building, you have to move at speed and scale. And I don't think that you just make a one-time, just like we were talking about designs and power and energy, as long as you have this spirit and this attitude, like this is what's important to us. As these challenges come, you adapt and overcome, whether it's Gen Z, whether it's the gen that comes after them, whatever else it is, to the degree that you solve that problem, I think you'll be successful. And when you stop solving that problem, that will be the end of your fill in the blank, family, organization, friendships, or whatever. So I think it's as important as anything else we do. The technology is going to change 20 years from now. The way we're going to apply it to our benefit, the way we're going to have to put control around it to make sure it leads to our furnishing and not controlling us is going to change. But this stuff can't change.
So like taking this, we'll start bringing this podcast back home. But this part in which DCAC this year has 3 parts to it. Every year it does.
What's DCAC?
The Data Center Anti-Conference in Austin.
It happened in a few weeks here.
Yeah, it sure is. And listen, I want to thank you for a couple things. When I first launched this business, it was almost 5 years ago, right? In fact, it was like I incorporated on October 19th. We launched on November 1st. But right before 7x24 Desert Ridge is at Phoenix, which we're hosting. Overwatch will be hosting a huge cabana party there for our 5-year anniversary. Before that, I was invited to go speak at DCD in Dallas real quick. And I was on a panel with a bunch of military people talking about military things. And one of the questions, you and I ran into each other and you asked me the only question in the audience that day. And you asked me a question.
Imagine that.
Yeah. But I mean, listen, you've always asked me the appropriate question, the appropriate time. And I think what I saw in a pattern when you'd ask me questions is that you knew I didn't have the answer, but you knew I needed to be thinking about that. So the question that you asked me in that time, and this was literally like 3 or 4 days before we went to 7x24 to launch. It was, hey man, I think it's great that you're hiring all these veterans. I'm a veteran too, but what do you do when you have all these people that you're hiring and they all have PTSD? And I was like, I'm so glad that he asked me that question, because I didn't think about it to that extent. I didn't intentionally and deliberately sit down and have a plan for how I would handle them. But there is a very famous quote that Sun Tzu has, in which, if this is what I'd say. In that answer, I think I tried to respond and said, the only thing I think I can do is make them feel safe so they can operate in an environment where they know that whatever happens, they're still going to be safe because we have their back. And then I've spent the last 5 years trying to iterate off that answer. And this conference that we have is a real big testament of that first question that you asked me, because this year, just like last year, 1/3 of that conference is focused on just the industry of the whole. I mean, I'll bring in someone from the broker side every year to give us a state of the union for the industry. What are these ridiculous programs that are going on? Because if you're in Texas, maybe you don't know what's going on in Virginia. Maybe you don't know what's going on in the Pacific Northwest. People like us have visibility to everything, but some people, they don't see the forest through the trees, right? So they get to come to this and get read in on what's going on in the rest of the world, because maybe they don't have the time to read Data Center Knowledge or Data Center Frontier or some of those things, but they can listen to something. I think the industry as a whole was 100% the focus at all these conferences before. Then it became power. Hey man, we need to address this power problem. And there's limitations to it. What's the limitations on natural gas? What's the limitation on X and Y and Z? And we really focus on those two dimensions, but none of that stuff matters if we don't fix the human element of what we do, right? So the people is what we do. This year I have Mike Sorelli, CEO of the Talent War Group, former Navy SEAL Team 6 SOCOM commander. He is our modern day Leonidas, right? And he hosts the Men's Journal Everyday Warrior podcast. I've had him on this podcast. I've been on his. And I'm bringing him on because what he does for a living is go out and help people understand, like, when you were in the situation that you were in, how many other people are in those situations as entrepreneurs. Just because you're an entrepreneur, I mean, I had one of my mentors is like, Kirk, if you're not in the fetal position once a quarter, you're not pushing yourself hard enough as an entrepreneur. You're playing too safe, and comfort is not where growth happens, right? So I'm like, dang, I have to push myself to the point which I think the test was for us to eventually get to the point where we believed in ourselves, right? When you regain your confidence in yourself, look at you. Not only do you not need anybody's help today, but nobody's going to stop you. I've watched you speak 1,000 times. My thing is it takes something. I don't know where you got your grit or that chip on your shoulder. It sounds like it was you were immersed in a culture that really made you feel safe and allowed you to heal yourself through that journey. But everybody that's listening to this, there's only 2 types of people listening to this podcast right now. And that's a fact. I don't give a shit if they're CEO or C-suite or down. They are people that are struggling with something personally. It could be the circumstance of their personal life or something professionally where they're not happy with what they're doing. Maybe it's below them, maybe it's above them, or maybe it's just outside their wheelhouse or their dojo of comfort. Right. But there are only 2 types of people. Those that feel, just like I just said, they are unhappy. And then those that lie about it and pretend they don't. At some point, they're struggling. Everybody's got a blind spot. Everybody's struggling with something. It's just like most people try to figure out, how do I not let anybody know I'm struggling? Or who can I go to for safety who's going to help me walk through this so I can figure out how to analyze and interpret this shitty ass situation I'm in so I can navigate myself out of this. If I could do that, maybe I'll lean back and put a hand down and help the next person behind me if someone could reach down and help me first, right? So the cultural part of what you're talking about at QTS, that's the only thing that matters to us, what we do. People ask us our strategy all the time. I'm like, it's simple. We build into our culture with everything we can. We make sure they feel inspired, safe, and fulfilled. And if we do that, they'll take care of everything else. They take care of all the clients. And I've learned that if they take care of the clients, then that takes care of all the problems. Yeah. Right. So like for you, add on that, because you and I've revved on things, and I know that leadership and helping others is a big part of your personal constitution as a human. So what do you have to add to that before we bring this one home?
Well, first of all, and I mean this sincerely, not because I'm on your podcast, I fell in love with you after I heard you talk a couple times, in spite of the things we don't know about you, in spite of the things that are shameful in your heart or your mind or whatever.
Things I'm not proud of.
Because, you can empathize with people that don't have it, whether it's their personal, professional, usually a combination of things.
Sure.
And if I see you speaking at a thing, I want to go and sit. And the last time I saw you, I think it was at Data Center World, and I just sat there like, good Lord, I love this guy. I love these
You were one
things.
of the 12 people.
I loved it. Don't diss yourself like that. One of the things that I also love, you didn't say it exactly this way, but I believe it's true. The biggest challenge I think our industry has is not any of the technologies we've talked about or regulation or whatever. We have a story problem. We have so many people that are big brains or whatever that I wish we would learn better how, while we go out into the world doing whatever we do, Little League, Scouts, the grocery store, the bar, whatever, that we're prepared to tell people why we love to do what we do.
Sure.
Here's how it fulfills me. It could be an economic fulfillment. It could be a esprit de corps team fulfillment. It could be a higher just power, whatever. People, not everybody sees
We'll have our own agendas.
Whatever our thing, right? One of the things that you're so able to do is these two things, which I think are critical to anything of faith, anything of relationship, anything. I have good news. Because I know there's bad news. I know if, for example, I know a community of people, so many of them come out of the service, for example, not all, but some, with fear and trepidation. How do I adjust in a not structured environment? Whatever it is, my constituency that I empathize with, I know these things to be true about them on the whole, not considering the margins. So I know the struggle to some degree. I know the challenge, the bad news. I know the feeling of being lost, or where do I point? And I have good news. What are you looking to join a community of people that you better get your effing stuff right? Because if your gear isn't right when you go out that door, it's a short trip. You're going to beat me to the ground. And then I'm going to see you with your widow. If we don't get this right on this sub, we're not coming home. And that's not acceptable. Whatever it is, if I'm a first responder, if I'm bringing high voltage, if I'm caving into the pressure of being an accountant, moving tens of millions of dollars and getting this contract right or whatever, and I'm feeling the pressure, whatever it is in our organizations. If I'm in social media and I put out the wrong thing and I got these big investors and they come in, like all of it, we feel this stuff. How do I have good news? I want to tell you about a community that has an economic opportunity that more often than not has an opportunity for esprit de corps. Not perfectly. You and I both know, even in my organization, opportunities and personalities where it's not all, like we work to perfection. We're not perfect. We work towards it. But if you understand the bad news, whether people articulate it or not, and you can articulate an opportunity to overcome it, and now you can find a place for them to fit across your broad spectrum of relationships that you have. I mean, as a human being, Kirk, what more is there for us? Like it is, I once got to hear an opportunity. I can't remember the woman's name, but it was a woman who was a hospice nurse for 60 years out of New Zealand.
Oof.
60 years. Every color, every gender, every age, every economic profile,
religion,
everything on their deathbed in squalor and opulence and whatever, and the things they talked about that they valued and don't value. You know, everything around us, everything we see here is going to end up in a landfill someday. All of it, except for relationships.
Yep.
That is, now we got a mission to do, right? The military says all the time, two things: accomplish the mission and troop welfare. If you're only troop welfare and not mission, we lose the mission. The other, our opponent wins. We may not like how they govern. Could be a really bad day for all of us. If we accomplish the mission and we have nobody to survive the mission, what do we do it for? It's catastrophe. They are not 1A and 1B. They are all one. Mm-hmm. So we have to accomplish the mission. We have to be troop welfare. And what I love about you and your mission, not just at Overwatch, but Kirk's, Othel's mission, imperfectly, you go about it. I'm going to tell people, I understand the bad news. I got some good news. Come and draw close to me. Let me tell you and see if you connect. And if you do, come and join us. And we help save people's lives.
I think that's what we do. That's the collective. You let me be on your podcast back in the day, which helped me get my chops and my confidence up a little bit more. So I appreciate that. But look, man, this is not the Kirk Fell Show by any means, right?
It's our show. Yeah, for sure. Your teams. Yeah.
Yeah. I have an amazing team of people that they all believe in what I believe in.
Mm-hmm.
That's what drives us.
Yeah.
But to that end, listen, man, this has been an honor to have you on this podcast.
Pleasure. My honor to be here.
Thanks for flying in, regardless of the number of hurricanes you have to dodge. Thanks for, when I reach out to you and ask you to speak at, my conferences and stuff like that, you always lend your voice. I appreciate those things. And most importantly, I appreciate the friendship. So that's what this industry is really about for me. Like, some of my best friends are in this industry. And I try to convince my kids, my family business is the military. Every man in my lineage is military. My instinct is to go to them and be like, you guys should all join the military. I think it's game. Mm-hmm. But I also am like, look, I don't know what you're going to do. We don't over glorify the military in our house anymore. It's not for everybody. It's not the same military. But I will say this, everybody can find value in this industry. Everybody who's in this industry right now should be looking for ways in which their kids could get into this industry. And what I'm trying to do is create more bridges and more stepping stones to allow us to be able to recruit from multiple dimensions, including the military, including the trades, some right out of high school and eventually college. But I don't think college is quite what it used to be with regards to what we're doing in this industry, but I'm not going to take anything away from that accomplishment. Yeah. But you don't need to have a college degree in this space to do really well. Would you agree?
Right. I agree. I think if we can encourage people to pursue a just cause, Peace Corps, military, do something, first responder, teacher that's called to do it, a nurse that's holding your hand. I was having a problem the other day, and my masseuse, I hate massages. I went to this person, and man, she talked to me and helped work through this particular situation. Like, this person, it's their thing.
Yeah, they heal.
They healed. And, all I'm saying is, if we can rally people as we encounter people, this may not be the answer for everybody, or the military or whatever. Although we need world-class people in all of these things. And find a purpose and a cause bigger than yourself. You got to pay your bills. You got to accomplish the mission. We want to thrive. But you also got to serve each other. And when we do that, when we draw together a community, I'm part of, outside of my work, a number of really strong personal communities through my local church and other things. Whatever these things are for you, find your dojo, find those groups of people that will hold you accountable. They're kind to you. They're not nice to you. And when you do that, it gives us the best opportunity. And that's all we're looking for. We're not looking for a guaranteed outcome. We're looking for an opportunity. And one of the things I like about you and your mission, in addition to the kind words to me, thank you, but really, I think this is where we connect, at least in some ways. Sure. I don't know that I'll bump into you online racing very time soon. By the way, just to finish that story. No, but you know where that went? This guy named John, who's a guy out of Boston where they made this software, bought this. This guy was a pretty successful business guy. And over the last 20 years, he's built this thing into an amazing industry. His name's John Henry. He owns the Boston Red Sox, is a multi-billionaire. That in racing thing is now part of NASCAR. Multiple own Roush Racing and others are part of it. They raced it online almost exclusively during COVID. It's a huge thing. And more kids in e-racing make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. The top 20 teams in online sports, not just racing, divided up like $100 million. No, 200 and something million dollars in winnings last year. They make a fortune. So as much as we joke about that, there is a fortune to be made in online sports, online racing. All the big F1 teams, they pay their kids 100, 200 grand a year to race their simulations, to develop those cars through digital twins and LiDAR and all of this other stuff that we use in our industry. Because they're putting a $1 billion team out on the track, and it's a lot less expensive to reboot your computer than rebuild a car that they wreck. So really interesting thing. But I think if we align people to our mission and purpose, just try to find those that resonate with the good news that you bring. If we do that, if we go about that in your personal story, you don't have to be an evangelist like we're evangelists. Just, why do you want to be an electrician? Why do you want to be an accountant doing this? What aligns with you with the volunteerism or the service of this thing? How do you hold your internal teams accountable to a good ethical standard? Do that. And I think if we do that, which is your heart, we just change people's lives. And what could be a higher calling than that?
That's our purpose, is to help as many people as we can. So, hey, listen, man, I'm really excited. Thank you for the time. Thank you for giving me all of this. I know I ran over longer on time, but I thought it was really important to unpackage the third element, right? There's the power of the industry itself, how we got into it, but there's that human element, and for you to be vulnerable and explain how you, even through your journey, had those setbacks. Everybody has them at some point.
Yeah.
Like I said, there's only two types of people: those that have them and those that lie about it.
Yeah.
But listen, I appreciate you. Thanks for coming on. Thanks for joining the Data Center Revolution, Dave.
I'm wearing my Data Center Revolution shirt. I completely forgot to take this shirt off before we got started, so I'll wear it at DCAC.
No, you're fine. No, this is great.
Thank you, brother. Have a good one.
Thanks, brother.